welcome to WION Live broadcast. I'm Susan Tehrani, coming to you live from New York City's Brooklyn Bridge Park. While we are doing things a bit different today, as always, we're going to start with the latest headlines. Blinken gets Chinese assurance on Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says China has renewed a promise not to send Russia to fight in Ukraine. Blinken wrapped up his China visit after a meeting with President Xi Jinping. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says that the bloc will not formally invite Ukraine at the upcoming summit. Kremlin critic and Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny defends himself against new charges of extremism at a Russian court. If convicted, the new sentence can extend his prison term by decades. Navalny is already serving sentences totaling 11 and a half years. Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank killed 4 Palestinians in a raid that saw 7 Israeli security personnel wounded and rare helicopter fire. Reuters report says that the World Bank will approve a $700 million aid package to Sri Lanka next week. If approved, this will be the biggest funding tranche for the nation since an IMF deal in March. China's Xi Jinping hailed quote-unquote progress in talks with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Beijing, the final engagement of a rare trip aimed at ensuring disputes between the superpowers do not spiral into conflict. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has wrapped up his 2-day visit to China. He held delegation-level talks with President Xi Jinping. The United States and China have pledged to stabilize their badly deteriorated ties during a critical visit to Beijing by U.S. Secretary of State.
Here in Beijing, I had an important conversation with President Xi Jinping, and I had candid, substantive, and constructive discussions with my counterparts, Director Wang Yi and State Councilor Qin Gang. In every meeting, I stressed that direct engagement and sustained communication at senior levels is the best way to responsibly manage our differences and ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. And I heard the same from my Chinese counterparts. We both agree on the need to stabilize our relationship.
Blinken, the first holder of his post to meet the Chinese leader since 2018, had earlier strode towards Xi with hands outstretched at the Great Hall of the People, a venue China often uses for greeting heads of states. After the meeting, Blinken also said a healthy, robust economy benefits both China and the United States. He said the U.S. was in favor of de-risking ties and not decoupling them. China has pointed to Taiwan as a main area of disagreement. Beijing claims the self-governing democracy, which buys weapons from Washington and has not ruled out using force to seize the island. Speaking about Taiwan, Blinken reiterated the long-standing One China policy. He repeated that the United States does not support the independence of Taiwan and stood by its stance of maintaining the status quo. Blinken also said the U.S. would prefer peaceful ways out of the conflict.
On Taiwan, I reiterated the long-standing U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed. It's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances. We do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. We continue to expect the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences.
We are being joined by Peter Kuznick from Washington, D.C. Peter is the director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Peter, thank you so much for joining us on WION. This seems to be a trip that has been downplayed, notably by the United States, that there won't be any concrete breakthrough. Nonetheless, it was noteworthy that at least Secretary of State met with Xi Jinping for about 35 minutes. Is that correct?
Yes, and that meeting was not announced until 45 minutes before they actually met. So it was not certain that they would even have that meeting. The fact that they met and that it was cordial is a step in the right direction.
Can you talk a little bit about how the Chinese are going to view this relationship moving forward? There are reports that ultimately Xi Jinping wants to come for a summit in November to California, and ultimately will have to sway public opinion that this visit is going to be worth it and possibly meet with President Joe Biden here.
You have to remember that tensions between the United States and China have been growing pretty steadily since 2011, when Hillary Clinton announced the Asia pivot. It was 2018 that the U.S. officially said its main threat to national security was not the international terrorism, it was Russia and China. And then under the Trump administration, the United States began an active trade war against China. During this time, the U.S. has also been sending more arms and more trainers to Taiwan. It has also been beefing up its relations in the Pacific, Australia, the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, and trying also with India. So the United States has been, if anything, from the Chinese perspective, the United States is trying to contain China and stop China's growth. Also with the economic policies on semiconductors. So China sees the United States as a declining empire. It still recognizes the United States military strength, but China has been building up its own military strength. So we saw this collision coming. And in recent months, it's gotten more and more tense. There are people in the United States, like this Army General Minihan, who said recently that the United States and China will be at war by 2025. And so that's the frightening prospect that we're all trying to avoid. Let's get this back to peaceful relations and find ways to work together on areas of mutual concern, like the climate, like economic growth, like dealing with international drug issues. There are so many things that we can work together on that are in both countries' interests and the world's interests.
Very true. Peter Kuznick from Washington, D.C., thank you so much for joining us on WION and for that perspective. We look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thank you.
The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is all set to visit the United States this week, a visit that will be marked by a joint address to the U.S. Congress, a state dinner, curated interactions with business leaders, and a diaspora event. This will be Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 6th visit to the U.S. and his first state visit, marking a significant and important milestone in India-U.S. bilateral ties. The Indian Foreign Secretary underlined that one of the key components of Prime Minister Modi's visit is the bilateral defense cooperation. The Biden administration is all set to sign a deal that would allow U.S.-based General Electric to produce engines for military aircraft on Indian soil. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was in New Delhi in the run-up to Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States, where a new roadmap for the U.S.-India defense industrial cooperation was agreed upon, including possible plans to jointly produce fighter jet engines in India and officially unveil Indus X. The establishment of India-U.S. defense acceleration ecosystem. The two sides decided to fast-track technology cooperation and co-production in areas such as air combat and land mobility systems, surveillance, reconnaissance, and the undersea domain. Indus X, the new initiative to advance cutting-edge technology cooperation, is designed to complement existing government-to-government collaboration by promoting partnership between private firms in the two countries. He will also lead a yoga session here in New York to mark the celebration of International Yoga Day. Various United Nations envoys and officials are also expected to join the event.
Ahead of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to United States, we know that the big focus will be on Yoga Day celebrations. I'm standing in front of the UN headquarters and the Indian Prime Minister will be leading the Yoga Day celebrations in this very place. Now, we know that when it comes to yoga, it was Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi who gave the idea of Yoga Day way back in 2014 during his address at the United Nations General Assembly, and now we know that it has become a celebrations of a sort, but essentially we will see people from 180 countries participating in the Yoga Day celebration, which includes influencers and diplomats. Also, of course, India has been focusing as to how yoga can help unite mankind and is seen as key to fulfilling UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. But all in all, it will be a significant week as India and US cement their relationship further. We know that after New York, the Indian Prime Minister travels to Washington, where he will be holding talks with the US President Joe Biden. This is an official state visit, which means the highest diplomatic protocol is being accorded by the US President on the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he begins his visit to United States. Sudhan Sibal for WION at the UN headquarters in New York.
Pakistan has been grappling with the unending economic crisis for quite some time now. The cash-strapped nation might be hoping for a loan deal revival with the IMF, but experts believe chances are very slim. In such dire conditions, remittances act as a catalyst for investment and keeps the economy moving. According to data from the State Bank of Pakistan, Pakistani expats sent home $2.53 billion in the first quarter of this year, a 7-month high. The bankrupt government depends heavily on these remittances as they are a huge source of foreign revenue. They also assist in keeping the country's foreign exchange reserves stable. These cash inflows are also used to pay for Pakistan's trade imbalances. The rise in these payments might not come as a surprise to many, as the country has a population of 9 million expatriates spread across the world. Out of these 9 million, 50% of them are settled in the Middle East, especially in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. As a matter of fact, a major chunk of these payments come from the Middle East. Last year, Pakistan received more than $18 billion in remittances from Saudi Arabia and UAE alone. Overall, Pakistan receives around $29 billion from these payments from non-residents. However, the country's defense minister, Khawaja Asif, is not happy with these figures. Recently, Asif addressed the expats in the National Assembly and bashed the contributions of its non-residents living in North America, Canada, and Europe as well.
इतने शेमलेस लोग हैं कि उन मुल्कों में बैठ के पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ साजिशें करते हैं, पाकिस्तान को गाली देते हैं, जिस मट्टी ने उनको जन्म दिया और जिस मट्टी को वो अबैंडन करके कोई वैंकूवर में बैठा है, कोई टोरंटो में बैठा है, वो न्यूयॉर्क में, कोई कहां पे बैठा हुआ है, कम का इज्जत करो अपने मुल्क की, जिसने तुम्हें जन्म दिया, जिसने तुम्हें बुनियादी शनाख्त दी। जनाब वाला 50 डिग्री टेम्परेचर के अंदर अबू धाबी, दुबई और जद्दा और रियाद में लोग काम करते हैं और अपने पाकिस्तान को, अपने वतन को पैसे भेजते हैं।
Asif alleged that these people only criticize their homeland and refrain from sending remittances, whereas he praised the expats of Saudi Arabia and UAE for sending a sizable portion of these kind of payments to their families. A recent poll has found that Florida governor and 2024 Republican contender Ron DeSantis is more preferred over current President Joe Biden and Donald Trump for the next polls. According to the survey, Biden is ahead of all his potential Republican rivals except DeSantis, against whom he is trailing 43% to 44%. Others poll estimate that they have allowed to be also predicted similar results, with the Republican governor topping Biden by 1.3 percentage points. According to the report, the Florida governor also has a 5-point edge over Biden among independents, winning them 43% to 38%. Meanwhile, in the poll estimate, Trump is lagging behind Biden 44% to 46%. DeSantis officially launched his 2024 presidential campaign on May 24th in somewhat a glitch-marked Twitter announcement, casting himself as Trump's only legitimate Republican rival. He has made electability a core tenet of his pitch for the GOP primary voters. Meanwhile, DeSantis' rival, Donald Trump, is facing multiple federal charges over his hoarding of document and government secrets. But Trump has dismissed the notion that he would ever drop out of his primary contest. DeSantis has also exercised restraint in comments over his rival's legal woes.